Welcome back to the show as we ramp up our campaign to address Australia's housing crisis. Today, money expert Effie Zahos is here to take us through the places where you can still find a home for a fair price.
Effie, break it down for us. Where is the most affordable suburb?
Well, look, it's a situation where those with a mortgage are doing it tough, and so are renters. And the key issue here, as we just heard, is supply. We had a huge busy weekend. Auction results over that 68% because of lack of supply. So having a look around the market, looking at some CoreLogic data here, this just shows the situation that buyers and renters are in. Let's take a look at, say, New South Wales first, Westmead there. This is what it would cost to rent in that suburb, $595. But if you were to buy a house in that area, your mortgage repayments will be almost $1,000 more per month. This just assumes a 10% deposit, but it doesn't include all the maintenance. It's just what are your repayments. So you can see here that it is more affordable still to rent than buy because we've had 10 massive rate hikes. Interesting, I just looked at the numbers this morning and, you know, what's the market saying with the rate hike next month? At this stage, there could be a possible pause, but look, that changes every day. In Canberra, you can't even pick up a place, a house, to rent for under $600. It is a unit. Then moving, say, to South Australia, a great little suburb there. I know that one, close to beach, close to the city. But again, it's a difference of almost $1,000 between a renter or someone who's actually paying a mortgage. So while both are doing it tough, it still is actually more affordable to rent. If you can get it.
Yeah, if you can get a place. Well, that's the problem because people are outbidding each other in those states where it's allowed.
Yeah, and this is the thing, and you touched on that before, the actual, the vacancy rates at record lows. And this is the problem also, we're seeing more migration coming through, so that's actually going to affect the situation. So, you know, right now, cheaper to rent suburbs, basically in Sydney, it's not, affordability to buy a house is shot out the window, it's renting. So this is the situation that most people are finding themselves in.
So how does renting stack up against buying then? I mean...
Oh, Carl, look, for me, it forces you to save, obviously, if you can get in, and it builds your equity. Renters don't get that, and that's the problem. When it gets to retirement and you've rented, if you haven't saved at the same time, you don't have that equity. But obviously, as I just showed you, it is a lot cheaper to jump in. You don't need that deposit. And right now, those rate hikes are working against borrowers, even though rent prices are going up.
And we're in this middle of this national housing rental crisis, as we saw over the weekend. Those figures, is renting still the most viable option if you can get into a place, and then how do you keep the rent where it is? Yeah,
exactly. So the next 12 months is still going to be pretty tough, and as I was saying, because more so lack of supply. 80% of properties are owned by private investors. That's a lot, and they're not borrowing at the moment for those reasons again that you pointed out. So I think for renters, if they're on a good price or they're locking in, try and lock in for a little while because it's still going to be tough with migration coming through. Try and get a lease that locks you in for a decent rate because obviously there are laws and they differ between states, but they can't tend to increase them.
There are some on the weekend talking with a lot of people aged between 25 and 40, right? So many of them have bought their first house, and so many of them right now are about to get crunched. They're right on the edge with interest rates. I mean, and you're saying that it might hold, but possibly if it goes up one or two more times, there's going to be a whole bunch of people who are really struggling.
So this is where we'll probably see more supply come onto the market as well. And you're right, Carl, we're yet to see those 800,000 plus homeowners who are going to roll off a 2% rate to a 6%. Some of them would have done very well because they've paid only 2% over this period. Hopefully they've put some cash away. But the reality is those that bought in the last couple of years may find, and I hate to say this, may find that they need to have that tough conversation with themselves.
Yeah, but then they sell it for a dramatically less amount than what they paid for.
I think the demand's there, so there'll be a buyer there. This is the problem. But and also the bank would want them to make sure that they pay back their loan. But the fact is there is the demand there, and I think the smart players will get in before the bank has to.
Interesting. Good on you, Effie. It seems every week we're bringing you a heartbreaking story about Australia's housing crisis, right? With the only changing being the worsening state of the market.
And today, sadly, no exception. We're joined by Melbourne single mum Sharon Westin and the Vice President of the Real Estate Institute of Australia, Leanne Pilkington. Thank you both so much for your time. Let's start with you, Sharon. Now, you have two teenage boys. Take us through the current situation for you.
So I've just moved house around 7 weeks ago. This is now my 40th house that I've lived in my life as a 46-year-old. It's the 7th in the last 6 years, and one of those I was in for 3 years. So you can imagine the amount of moving that I've done in a very short time. Most of those moves have been due to the landlord selling the property. One of them couldn't finance their mortgage, and my most recent one, I was only there 9 months before I got a notice to vacate, and it was simply because they wanted to raise the rent but didn't choose to ask if I could afford it.
This is a story, unfortunately, that we're seeing replicated. Before we get into the reasons for that and the possible repercussions, what sort of the toll does it take on you and your family to constantly move? They say it's one of the biggest stresses in life.
Absolutely. You know, I look great for a 21-year-old, don't I?
You do.
It's really horrible. I feel like I had PTSD this last move. I just broke down. I was broken down basically for about 3 days. I couldn't stop crying. And the biggest thing for me was actually going upstairs and telling my children that we had to move again and seeing the heartbreak on their face.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I can deal with anything, but having to see them go through it so many times is really difficult.
Yeah, it's disconcerting mentally, isn't it, when you can't really anchor yourself anywhere. You don't ever feel like you're at home.
Exactly.
And then, of course, you've got to add to that the financial burden of moving every time and trying to find something.
Absolutely, 100%. This last move cost me, or it was about $11,000 out of pocket because I had to get removalists. I can't physically do it anymore. You know, there's the bond and the rent up front. There's carpet cleaning, and there's so many costs involved each time. So that's simply why I can't afford a house, because I've had to move so many times.
And this is why people are getting so much rent and just springing it on people who are renting out their places. So let's bring Leanne in studio now. You're hearing these countless stories. Over the weekend, I heard from friends who had said, look, rent had gone up by a couple of $100 a week because they were coming to the end of their lease. Yep. News Limited over the weekend in Brisbane and Sydney identified the suburbs where rent had gone up by huge amounts of money. How can that actually happen? And what are the effects of that?
Well, I mean, one of the problems that we're facing that Sharon actually highlighted is we've got a lot of landlords selling. We've got more landlords selling than buying, and so we've got less and less property available. The government, if you have a look back in the 80s, 10% of all of the new housing approvals were public housing. Today that's 2%.
Wow.
We've got a 10-year wait for public housing, 60,000 people on the list. The situation is just getting worse and worse, and when we're looking at changes to legislation that disincentivise landlords, many of them are going to choose to sell. That's just the reality.
What is happening with that? Because obviously we've seen those changes in Victoria being introduced, sort of hangover from the pandemic.
Yep.
Are you seeing there that landlords really are struggling?
Landlords are just choosing to get out of property as an investment. If you consider that you can put your money in the bank and get a return of 5.65%, yields in residential property are around about 3%. A little over 3, so you can understand people are making different choices.
But the pain here is actually with landlords who are upping the rent by a couple of $100 a week in some instances. And that just puts people who are renting their places out in such a terrible financial state, and in a situation like we're seeing there in Melbourne. It's like terrible.
It is. It's awful. But think about it this way. The average mortgage in Australia is $750,000. Since May last year, those repayments have gone up by $1,343 a month. Landlords usually have two mortgages, the house they live in and the house they're renting out. And so rents have gone up in Sydney by about 11%. Mortgage repayments gone up by 47%.
So what's the answer here then? Because you can't be turfing people out, and you can't be also. I don't think it's fair to be paying $1,000, you know, a week or whatever it is for people in rent, and then you up it to $1,500 a week.
Sure.
You can't be doing that, can you?
You can only do it because there's so much demand, and so what we need to do is get more supply into the market. We need to have more people investing in property. 14% of Australians are property investors, but 30% are renters. So we need to get more people in property investment. We need the government to have a look at the public housing supply. We need to have a look at the red tape around development. There's a lot of things that we need to do, but thinking that private investors can actually take the brunt of housing all of the people who want to rent is not realistic.
Sharon, what do you think when you hear all that?
It's such a difficult thing, you know. I know landlords have it really tough at the moment, like all Australians. However, I think there needs to be a little bit of compassion for renters as well. You know, even just having to pay bond again before we've got our bond back, you know, it's a lot of money to
Bond's
outlay.
a massive issue. Massive.
Oh, 100%. You know, there should be the ability to actually just transfer it across, and then if there's any money that needs to be taken out, that can be dealt with.
What do you think about that, Leah?
It would be great in theory if you could do it. Everybody would love that. But the problem is when people leave and there's damage or they haven't paid rent and you need to get the money, trying to chase the money from a tenant that has gone and the money's been spent on another bond is challenging.
Yeah. Vexed issue at the moment. Appreciate you coming on. Thank you. Thanks, Leanne.
Hey there, Today fans. Sarah and
What's my name again?
oh my goodness, Carl.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel, though. Subscribe now for more news, special reports, and amazing Aussie stories.
And Carl misbehaving,
Whoa,
of course.
that never happens.
Always happens.
What's she talking about?